We're going to bring on Nick Rausch to join the program now. We're going to talk a little bit about the Gators and Kentucky game in our series where we discuss all of the Gators matchups. Nick, welcome to the show, my friend.
I'm happy to be here, and love what Nick had to say there about the funneling players to the visits. It's funny, like some schools, if you take a picture of them while they're on campus, it's
grab your phone and Gronk smash it.
Yeah, but if you at others, it's like, hey, why don't you come over here and talk to this guy while it's happening? It's funny how that works.
It's amazing what like positive PR and relationships can do to you when you don't treat them like the enemy. But that's neither.
Florida had a 5-star offensive lineman, and Nick, if I just mention offensive line recruiting, you'll probably see the chat go crazy. But a 5-star offensive lineman on campus and didn't want anyone to know about it.
Yeah.
Don't let the streets know that we have a good positive story coming to you.
That's somewhat relatable, even though Kentucky doesn't necessarily recruit the same caliber of player. I guess technically in the rankings right now they are because Florida hasn't racked them up.
Hey, Nick.
Nick's coming on like the UCF writer last week, just ready to throw bows right off the bat.
Corey, I let Nick know that we had a guy on from UCF last week who came in saying that UCF's going 17-0. And it caught Corey off guard. His lies weren't ready. I think he was still in
I'm ready. I'm ready this week. I'm definitely ready.
He's ready. He's ready for some. He's ready for some sparring this week.
And I can't take another Kentucky L, so I gotta lie because there's no way. No.
I gotta say, Corey, it has been one of those things that it still feels like an out of body experience every time Kentucky beats Florida. Like,
sure.
You
should be on this side, Nick.
Well, because I brought my dad. He came down with us for the last game down at the Swamp, which was the Anthony Richardson Will Levis game, and he spent his whole life having Spurrier just like rub our noses in it for just years and years and years, being a season ticket holder, and then to go down to the Swamp and watch Kentucky through that, that's a rewarding, like I can't believe this is happening kind of moment. But now. I don't want to say
this. Nick, don't do this.
It's not expected, but Kentucky's 4 road games are Ole Miss, Tennessee, Texas, and Florida. Not an easy road slate, right?
No. Yeah.
But that's Tennessee, rough. Just nightmare stuff. It's kind of they still got our number. We're still living that Rocky Top sort of nightmare. So then you look at the other games and you're like, I'm not expecting second to last game of the year going down to Texas. Ole Miss, Kentucky's played them close as of late, but it's still, the lane train's rolling. So you look at it and you say, man, if they're going to steal one on the road, they kind of have to keep this going. But I know from the other side, you all have had the schedule conversation incessantly. And that I know that has to be we got to win this game just to let everybody feel good for a week before the cocktail party.
Yeah. No, I think that's it. Kentucky's done a great job of each of the last few years. Somebody has a breakout game. It's probably their career defining game has been against Florida. I know last year Florida couldn't stop a nosebleed on defense. Well, basically for the entire season, but definitely against that Kentucky team. And I think the year before it was the same. Cavassier Smoke. It's always somebody you've never heard of that all of a sudden is a household name after. They could play Florida every week and be a Heisman Trophy winner.
Well, kind of to your point there, Nick. I remember 2 years ago when Kentucky beat Florida at home for the first time, because I think the streak ended in Gainesville, and then the following year, or it was whenever they beat Florida at home for the first time, and like being in the press box, like everyone in the press box, Kentucky writers were kind of just like, "Whoa, the stands emptied." Like I think the Lexington cops were not trying to keep people off the field, but were helping them get down from the stands to celebrate.
Yeah.
But just like the vibe in the press box was kind of like we were all just like sitting there stunned. Like there was like very little typing going on, kind of just like watching the scene unfold. That was, of course, when Dan Mullen said we had more yards than they did.
Yeah.
Nasty work.
Shout out to Dan.
No shout out to Dan. How about that?
on behalf of all Kentucky fans watching, shout out to Dan. We thank you for all of your contributions to Kentucky football over the years. But that game in 21, that was, that was fresh off of Florida winning the SEC East.
Mm-hmm.
They were still a good football team. And then kind of from that point, the wheels started spinning there, which has kind of been a theme throughout Mark Stoops' tenure. You lose to the Wildcats, and then all of a sudden everybody thinks you should be fired. It happened to Coach O, happened to Pruitt. Like it's a theme. It could be a theme again this year, and I think particularly if the Florida defense doesn't figure it out. You all obviously are much more well in tune on that end, but from my perspective, because we don't know what either team is going to be this late in the season. That's, I think, the hardest part about projecting this game out. Because Brock Vandagriff may be the truth, but it also may be it could be the other end of it where they're like pulling teeth to score points all year, because that's really been the theme of the Mark Stoops era. If you have any gripes, it's not beating Tennessee enough, and it's consistently having these moments where your defense is keeping you in the game and then you can't score 24 points to win, which that's not asking a lot in modern college football. And I know that Kentucky's got their top receivers back. They've got 4 out of 5 starters on the offensive line, but new play caller, new bell cow back from Ohio State, new quarterback. Mm-hmm. There is a lot of uncertainty there. And so, I don't know if it's going to be, if we're coming into this game and we're saying, well, at least Florida's defense is bad and maybe they can finally get right here. Or that's where I think ultimately a lot of this matchup will be determined, is just how good is the Kentucky offense. And I have faith that Brock Vandagriff's going to have a high floor because he's a good athlete. He can run. And hell, some of these guys, if you can just hit a 7-yard hitch, they can turn that into a 15, 25-yard game because they're good enough athletes. But that's where I think the biggest question mark going into the season is, what's Kentucky's ceiling offensively? And we really just don't know.
The offensive line of Kentucky boasting 2 former Florida Gators, Jalen Farmer and Gerald Mincy, along with Marquez Cox.
Buddy, I forgot Gerald Mincy went to Kentucky. That's his third SEC. May she rest in peace to Kentucky, SEC East team.
Yeah, absolutely. So the offensive line is Mincy, Burton, Eli Cox, Marquez Cox, and Jalen Farmer. How's that unit looking?
It's funny you brought up Mincy too. I actually, before the game in 18 where they snapped the streak, Kentucky was recruiting a couple kids from Gibbons, Cardinal Gibbons. That's right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, in Lauderdale. And Mincy was an underclassman that Kentucky was kind of recruiting. So it's funny how things come full circle. Both of those kids transferred out. But really a lot of it is going to be predicated on how well he plays. They like Farmer, even though he played sparingly at Florida, because he is a big body guy and they want to play a very inside zone heavy, like just run it down your throat sort of style of football. And between him and Ohio State transfer Ben Chrisman, they're really pushing a couple of these guys who have played a lot, but it was under a different offensive line coach. I think a lot of the key, because Marcus Cox, I believe this is his 8th season. He played 5 years, 7th. So he played 5 years in Northern Illinois. One of them was a redshirt year. One of them he had a long injury. Then you get the COVID year. So he's going into year 7. He's got a ton of experience. We know he's a pretty good ball player.
He's working on his PhD.
Exactly.
Years old. I mean,
PhD in football. But Jagger Burton was this blue chip top 200 player that they really need to get to playing like a top 200 player at left guard. And I know you think like, oh, left guard, like it's just a left guard. But the sort of continuity they've been missing over the years, a lot of it is just the consistency inside, moving those big uglies off the line of scrimmage. And they brought in Eric Wolford from Bama, and he's a fire and brimstone, MF you up and down the field sort of kind of guy. No nonsense. Whereas the last guy was the opposite. So I think some guys do better with others, and I'm wondering if this guy can pull some out of him to bring some of that nasty back to the Kentucky offensive line, where I don't think it's ever going to be like that group that had, consensus All-Americans and future NFL draft picks. But they can be, I think, top half of the SEC if the things click. But Mincy, to go back to who we started with, Like I don't know what happened at Tennessee, but there was some. They weren't always seeing eye to eye there. So hopefully he sees eye to eye with the folks in Lexington.
In Kentucky, it's interesting, and we talked about this in Dallas. I think Mark Stoops has to recruit differently, and you kind of just mentioned it. Like Kentucky's not getting the same kind of guys out of high school, maybe that Florida, Alabama, Texas, Florida State, Clemson are getting. It's another year, another transfer portal quarterback. They're kind of like they just stay for 1 or 2 years, and you go into another one. What's the early thought consensus about Brock Vandagriff?
The thing about Brock too is I mentioned it earlier about him being kind of you don't know where the ceiling is. You don't know how good he can get there, but you do feel like the floor is pretty high because I mean, dude was a 5-star at Georgia, right? Like,
who's
that? Right, exactly. Like 5-star out of Georgia who played for his dad in a very successful program, Prince Avenue Christian. He seems like he's got the right head on his shoulders, and he has the athletic tools where Devin Leary, he could kind of extend the pocket, whatever, but you couldn't do the quarterback run game. And so much of their success in previous years was just like, all right, 3rd and 7. If it ain't there, just take off and go. And so I think you're going to be able to extend some drives that they couldn't do last year with Vandagriff. But everything that they've basically said, whether it's on the record coaches, off the record coaches, people at Georgia, it's like, yeah, he really is doing everything the right way. Like he's a friend to everybody in the locker room. Like he's got some good leadership qualities, but like how's he going to process things when stuff starts popping off? And I think that's a fair question for all these guys who have had to sit and wait. And my pipe dream as a Kentucky fan is watching Carson Beck last year, where that Auburn game. I mean, Beck wasn't a future first-round draft pick for half the year. The Auburn games happens. He throws an early pick. They have a fumble in the first possession of the second. Like they're kind of in trouble until the very end. They overcome that, and then the next game against Kentucky, he's Joe freaking Montana, and he's just layering the ball in everywhere. He is unstoppable. So I think you're going to have to see some of that learning early on. Like there's going to be some hard lessons before things click, and that's why, like, if I was wanting to get Kentucky, I'd rather have him earlier in the year. Like South Carolina, they get Kentucky week 2. I think but they're also breaking a new quarterback as well. But I would rather face Kentucky early in the year to try to get Brock before he kind of pushes through that wall, if you will.
New offensive coordinator. Speaking of Gator connections, Bush Hamdan, former coach at UF.
Wide receiver graduate assistant,
Yeah,
I think?
wide receiver. Yep. I know anytime that there's a position opening, he's a name that the Gator faithful on the message boards throw around. Obviously, Kentucky over the last few years has had some great offenses, great offensive coordinators that have left and gone to the NFL, back from the NFL, and then back to Liam Cohen. Is that what his name was? And then there's been a few others. But what difference can you expect in a Bush Hamdan offense compared to maybe what we've seen the last few years?
Mark Stoops likes the pro style because he can recruit quarterbacks to it, because it's like saying, hey, you're going to play this in the NFL, and also you can still run the damn ball. I mean, and that's where he wants to be. He wants to be somewhere around 50-50. But the issue was with Cohen and then Scangarella, who was 1 year between, was just the verbiage was too long. It took too long to get the play calls in there. And so even before they approved the helmet technology stuff, like towards the end of last year, Cohen was even saying, yeah, we got to make things faster. And the biggest thing with Bush Hamdan coming in, he was a guy who learned pro style for 1 year in the NFL, but has spent most of his time in college, whereas the other guys spent most of their careers in the NFL, and then were just doing the college thing for a year or two to kind of bolster their resumes. But his offense is a base no huddle. There's a lot of check and look and see sort of stuff from the sidelines. So they'll be able to play faster, and I think that's going to be the biggest difference. You'll see a lot more of that kind of pistol stuff. But just from a personnel standpoint, he feels like the kind of coach that some Kentucky fans will hate the things he says, but the head coach will love him. Before the spring game, which wasn't a game, and it was a whole big stupid mess. But they basically had a spring game. They just didn't want to televise it or tackle people to the ground. And Hamden was like, just be boring golfers, right? Like, just be efficient. Don't make stupid decisions. So, like that, Kentucky needs to be more efficient. And if you can be methodical, then fine. Like, he strikes me as a very methodical in his approach. So that's the question I have, is where does some of the explosiveness come from? Will that happen on his regular basis as it did last year with Ray Davis? I don't know.
I mean, Mark seems to be, he said it at SEC Media Day that this is the best staff that he had. I know you've been around the program for a little bit. Just him leading up into a season, does this season feel a little bit differently with his confidence?
It does, but it's also just been a weird offseason because of the stuff at Texas A&M, because of the changes to NIL and everything that comes with that. So you've had this, like, I can't tell how much of it is him complaining about how just college football jobs have changed in general, or how much of it is complaining about his specific job in Kentucky. And it's hard to know the difference between the two with the A&M stuff out there. But, like, you have all of that going on, and then you have the 16-team divisionless SEC, which is tough enough as is. Schedule ain't easy. But then, like, this roster, it's all redshirt juniors and seniors. Like, this roster is his most experienced. It could be his best defense he's had. There maybe it isn't a college football player of the year in Josh Allen, but Deion Walker, they don't grow Deion Walkers on trees. Like, that dude is a freak. He seems to always be at his best against Florida too, for whatever reason. Like, he just is a monster. So they have, like, that's the part of all of this that, like, I think things are set up for them to maybe have one of their best teams, but how will they perform when you're going on the road against Florida, Tennessee, Texas, and Ole Miss? Like, that's the part of this that makes it complicated to handicap just how good this team can be.
And if you are 6'6", 345 pounds, and you're not wearing the number 0 or a single digit number, you're doing it wrong. So shout out to Deion Walker for having that foresight to ask for the smallest number possible.
I like it.
When he dropped back to pass, like his like coming out a moment was that tackle for loss in the swamp 2 years ago. And then last year he drops back into coverage and splits a dude in half. And you're like, what? And also Graham Mertz, like, maybe just don't, like, maybe throw the ball over the linebackers. I mean, like,
it's a lot to ask for.
Mid-range Mertz, baby.
Oh, come on.
Hey.
Mertz. Here, he's on the Maxwell walk list right now.
We just opened the show with the very selective, hard ticket, club to get into Maxwell Award preseason watch list.
That's right.
Not many on it, but Graham Mertz is.
If with Eli Badges and also Trey Wilson, I don't think he got to go. Them guys could take a distance. I think we just need him to deliver it and not turn the ball over. We'll be all right, to be honest with you.
Here's a sliding doors moment to consider. What if Graham Mertz was Kentucky's quarterback this year and Florida had Brock Vandagriff?
I would feel way better about Kentucky than I would.
My lives would be better for sure.
Because that I mean, that was a sliding doors moment, right? Kentucky was kind of all in on Mertz, and we were starting our, like, what's this going to look like? Because I'm sure it was a kind of a tough sell on Neuro's end going into last year. But I mean, it is the Wisconsin offense. I mean, they always suck. But we were fully prepared for that to happen. And then Devin Leary kind of presented himself as an option, and that they ended up saying, actually, Graham, if you want to go to Florida, that's fine. We're going to go all in on Leary. So
Leary, I think we won that battle there, to be honest with you. Bad decision.
You definitely won it in last year from just who was the better guy last year. Leary had the most touchdowns in the SEC, the worst completion percentage, and the most interceptions. So definitely won it last year. But if Vandagriff, that's the thing. It's like you're rolling the dice. Like, if Vandagriff is awesome this year, then maybe the long play wasn't such a bad deal after all.
Yeah. But I do think that as well, then we got a problem, right? How was Brock? Like, when you think about Brock, like, spring game wise, did you guys like what you saw spring game from Brock?
We did, but it was like they didn't even do the fun spring game stuff. Where it was one of
those Muschamp spring games where it's like, hey, we're just gonna go out there because we have to have a 15th practice.
Yeah, and it wasn't even like I want to do the Bobby Petrino. Like I'm from Louisville, so I'm used to the Bobby Petrino spring practice games where it was like, let's just get guys wide open downfield and one-on-ones and just throw bombs all day. Like they didn't do that. So I think that's the biggest question. You know, he has a big arm, but are they going to connect? But underneath, like he had one. They've always said his best skill trait is his ability to ad lib, and that was his best play of spring game. Was he called the wrong play? He heard it wrong in his headset. He rolled out and just made something happen, threw it downfield for like a 35-yard gain. So,
what I really kind of harped on last year, my take on Florida's loss, I thought Billy Napier tried to play Kentucky's style of football. And we talked about the way Mark Stoops recruits, and you have to do it a little bit differently. Nick Mingione does it the same way. Like Kentucky baseball plays a different brand than any other team in baseball in the SEC because of how they have to recruit. And I think it was a mistake for Florida to go up there and be like, hey, listen, we're going to line up and we're going to out-physical Kentucky. And we're going to take it to them. I would hope Billy Napier has learned that lesson. Florida has gotten a lot faster on the edges, both defensively, at the rush spot as well as at receiver. How does Kentucky and the defense, if Florida says, hey, listen, trying to pro style out Kentucky did not work. Let's go back, spread things out, get our speed and space, and see if our athletes can beat their athletes. How does Kentucky's defense match up if Florida can do that?
That's how you beat Kentucky this year. Because like you can't run in the ball against Deion Walker, De'Aaron Jackson, and Pop Dumas Johnson. Like they're very stout up the middle. But the questions are on the outside. I know Max Harrison was a preseason first team All SEC, but they just quit throwing at his side of the field halfway through last year because they didn't have to. You could just go through the middle and to the other side. That's really arguably your biggest question mark is cornerback 2. Are they going to be good enough? And Kentucky went and got a transfer from Michigan, DJ Waller. He played in 10 games as a true freshman. He was competing for that starting position in spring practice, depending on who you talk to up there, whether he won it or the other 4-star guy they had up there won it. That Waller's a big part of the equation because he looks the part, like shaking that guy's hand, like he's got catcher's mitts for hands. He can tie his shoes standing up, got really long arms. Like he's a good looking athlete, but how good is he? Right? Like I've seen some good looking guys coming off the bus, but how well can they play? That's the biggest question mark, and just the inconsistencies at safety. I mean, the pass defense last year was maybe the worst since they started this bowl run, where they had been top 5 in the SEC almost every year. You had to replace a couple starters at cornerback, and things just they really got away from them, particularly on third down. So that's the way you beat Kentucky this year is you do try to spread them around, you try to beat them on the edges, and downfield, right? Like those safeties, they kind of fell for some eye candy and were susceptible to getting hit in big plays, even in obvious passing situations.
Yeah, I know Billy always listens every week. I am available that week. Actually, I should be back from paternity leave then.
Yeah.
I am available for that offensive coordinator paycheck to come and call plays. Been practicing on the EA college football. I'm ready.
Awesome. Well, best of luck to you, Nick. I have one coming as well any day now. So I'm glad I haven't gotten a text during this here conversation that we've got to get going.
We're just telling me you got another 10, 15 minutes and you'll be anywhere.
Honey, hold on. It's not your first. It's not your first.
You'll be fine.
He's been through this before.
What am I going to do? I'm just here for emotional support anyway. Nick, I'm going to need your help. I know that we're replacing Ray Davis. Kentucky is Cavassier Smoke. I'm going to need some help on some pronunciations of these running backs. We have Diamante Terranium.
Chip Trainum. He just goes by Chip because he's got a chip on his shoulder. Or no, it was Blue Chip. They called him Blue Chip when he was in middle school, and that just got shortened to Chip.
I don't love it. If my name was Diamante, I think I'd go by that. And how do you say Trainium?
Trainum.
Okay.
Yep, just Chip Trainum. The next one's fun.
Yeah. Is it Demi? First name?
Yeah, first name's right.
Sumo Carnaga. I'm missing the last part. Okay. Carnbaghi? Sumo Carnbaghi? The
faster I say it, the better. Demi Sumo Carnbe. Like you kind of just don't even really acknowledge the G.
Where you guys find these folks? You guys always seem to have.
And are you hoping to not write about running backs for the entire year?
No, I kind of like want to because just run the damn ball. It works, man. If I could go back and if I
But
could,
you guys hate it.
if we could just live in the Lynn Bowden offense forever, like, dude, that works. Let's freaking do it. I don't care. Like, let's do it. So I would be fine with that. They are going to have to lean heavy on Chip, and then the thing is too is they really like the freshman from the I believe he's from the Panhandle, Steeds, Florida. Yeah, he's a Panhandle guy. Jason Patterson. He was committed to Cincinnati. He led the state in rushing as a junior in whatever class that was, maybe 5A. But they really like him because he's a big guy. He's big, 6'2", like 225, and they really liked him in spring. But it is hard to tell these running backs when they're not getting tackled to the ground.
Okay.
What do you project season wise? Like, what's the win losses? What are you thinking Kentucky pulls up this year?
I pulled up the schedule, and it's Georgia early.
Yeah, week 3 Georgia's not kind, but a lot of it's going to hinge on that South Carolina game. So the not so fun stat for Kentucky football: they're 3-7 in their last 10 home games against Power 4 competition. They got to win at home. So I think they can be an 8-win team if they sweep South Carolina and Auburn and Louisville. But like they're going to beat Louisville. That's just what they do now. But the South Carolina and Auburn, those are 2 big ones. And ultimately, the reason why I'm probably going to predict a 7-5 season is because they like to win games, like one game they shouldn't, and they like to lose a game they shouldn't. I have a feeling they're going to win at Ole Miss as like a stunning, like, oh my gosh, and they'll be ranked in the top 15 nationally, and then things will, something stupid will happen, and they'll spiral a little bit down the stretch in this tough schedule and lose to Auburn in a tough toss-up game at home.
Maybe start spiraling week 6.
I'd like that. Right now, Vegas has you guys at 6.5, minus 125, 6.5, minus 105 under. Do you have them going over?
Yeah. I do like the over just from the talent level. Like, I do think it's good. And the other part of it too is like I know, like I've seen a bunch of bad receivers at Kentucky and who kind of punch above their weight. And these guys they have right now are really good. If they can just hit their potential, Dykel Shorts is a big hire. If that can hit, it works. Like they have a lot of talent that's like there. And if it just comes together, it's just as good to hang around with these other guys. But guys, part of the reason why nobody wants to predict Kentucky to go over or have this big season is because they fell for it in Will Levis' second year. They fell for it with Devin Leary. It's not, don't fool me 3 times, right? But this is probably their most well-built team of all of them. So that's why Kentucky's a fascinating team, I think, for folks to watch from afar like yourselves, where it's like, man, this damn Kentucky team, they're doing it. Stoops is doing it again, right? Like you can see a scenario where he's got them playing good. They're feisty. They're not going to be an easy out week to week. But last year, like they had 3 games that are one possession here or there where they're 2 or 3 stupid plays away. They didn't execute down the stretch. If they can execute down the stretch, that margin of error is really thin, and they lived in it in all the wrong ways a year ago.
So you're over 6.5. If Kentucky loses to Florida, can they still hit the over, or is that over 6.5, including a win in Gainesville?
Not happening, man. Just not happening. We get tackled this year.
Brother, it happened 2 years ago. I was there.
I'm just letting you know it's not happening this year. We got tacklers this year.
I'll probably end up picking Kentucky to beat Florida because it makes me feel good. It makes me feel so good.
It just warms my heart.
It's a gateway drug to football success. They say it's marijuana. No, going and winning at the Swamp. It makes you believe you can do crazy things.
I'll tell you what, man. I grew up. Go ahead. No, get your thing off, Nick.
If Kentucky loses to Florida, can they still hit the over?
Yeah, because that Auburn game's after the fact, and they can still beat Louisville. And they still could, and that's why I think that, like, I was having a conversation with somebody at Media Days, and they're like, well, if they can't beat South Carolina, then who's to say they can beat so-and-so? And it's like, well, that's scoreboard math, and that's not how the sport works. You're 1 week away from being humbled. And I really do think that, like, aside from the Georgia game that, I'll probably talk myself into because that's just what I do as an optimistic Swords fan. But like outside of that game and maybe the road trip to Texas, like Kentucky should be in every game they play in, which is a very dramatic twist in the Kentucky football I grew up in, where you just were like writing L's on the schedule before the season started.
Man, at some point in October, it was basketball season. Was the Kentucky football?
We've moved on. We've moved on from that.
Yeah, we have the exact opposite on our show in the top right corner there. He talks himself into a loss every week. I
was nasty picking games last year. Check yourself. Including picking Kentucky to win, which I won't be doing this year.
They call Negative Nick for a reason.
I was just right. Man.
I want to talk a little bit about basketball. Before we do that, you guys have any more football questions?
No questions, but I do like overall, like just preseason, we're far out here, but I do think we beat Kentucky this year. You guys are gonna have to run the ball again to beat us, similar to last year. I think we've shored up the defense side of the ball, especially at the linebacker position. That's the game Shamar got hurt or no?
Shamar got hurt in Jacksonville during warmups on the Jaguars' pretend grass.
Okay, but yeah, I think our linebackers.
Sorry,
I think our linebacker position shored up. Safety position, we also brought some guys in the portal at that spot. They should run the alley better, come down and tackle a little better as well. Defensive coordinator change. So I'm expecting a new defense. Offensive wise, I think we got playmakers. Running game is going to be stout. We just need to put 11 players on the field at all times, and we should be fine. I'm going to be honest with you. I think Trey Wilson is going to be a household name by the end of the season. I think Elijah Badges is going to fill in for Ricky Pearsall just fine. I think Ricky, all that Merck's got to do is just deliver the ball like he did last year and not turn it over. His team should be more mature. This is his second year in the offense. That's our advantage over a lot of teams on our schedule, is that we got a returning quarterback. That should pay dividends for us. So we'll see how it all plays out. And if we lose again, I'm firing everybody because I ain't grew up losing to Kentucky, bro. I'm be honest with you. I can't lose to Kentucky again, so I'm firing everybody if we lose to y'all.
I think it really comes down to – I think it comes down to the question that I asked Nick. It's like Florida literally went to Lexington trying to beat Kentucky by playing Kentucky's brand of football. That Mark Stoops, who is now the longest. That
Kentucky has a brand of football. I'll be honest with you.
Mark Stoops is the longest tenured coach in the SEC.
I'm not saying that Mark Stoops doesn't deserve his flower and his credit, but if you would have told me 15 years ago we'd be talking about Kentucky branded football, I'd have called you nuts.
Listen, they've got a brand of football. They recruit, they develop, and they play to it. Billy tried to beat them playing that brand of football. You have to have learned your lesson.
I have now.
Not you, Billy.
Yeah. Well,
Billy had to have learned his lesson.
Got a lot.
And you've got to try something else with the added playmakers you've got and the speed and space. Send the hashtag speed and space.
Nick's got to run here in a second. We'll talk a little bit more about Kentucky and what this game means for Florida after he runs. Mark Pope, new coach. John Calipari leaves to go to Arkansas. Expectations for him?
There's excitement, which is not something you could say if John Calipari was still around. It was a much needed change of pace, breath of fresh air. And he really is zagging in every way that Calipari zigged, whereas like Cal's like, we're just going to out-athlete you with the best players, and we're not going to run any sort of style of anything. Mark Pope was like, we're going to get old guys who can play in my system and who can shoot a lot of threes and play in space. So ultimately, I think they do have a pretty good roster that's going to be a lot of fun, and it's kind of Todd Golden, Nate Oates style with this analytics. We're going to shoot a lot of threes and also a lot of layups. And by the way, we play in space. We should get a lot of layups too, just back cuts and stuff like that at the rim. A lot of it, though, is going to come down to just how good can they be defensively. And I don't know the answer to. Like Amari Williams, their big guy they got from Drexel, he was a 3-time conference defensive player of the year. But Mark Pope never had a top 50. I think he had one top 50 defense ever. He's been a coach previously. And that's really where, as much as you wanted to blame the offense down the stretch when things started to sour for Cal, it was all defensive. Like they just got really bad defensively in the later years of the Calipari era. So that's my ultimate question mark going into the Pope era. That and then the recruiting aspect of it. It's going to be different. You're not recruiting like John Calipari. But you still need to hit on a couple of these big-time guys. There's a couple kids from Kentucky that are of that caliber in this upcoming class. So he does at least have that going his way as he starts off on the recruiting trail.
Awesome. Well, Nick, we appreciate your time. today. Nick with On3. Let everybody know where they can follow
Pleasure,
you
fellas.
For all your Kentucky updates, and then we'll have you on as we get a little bit closer to the game.
For sure.
In October, I believe this year, or November. Yeah.
I'm at Rausch KSR, like Rausch Racing, Roush KSR, and KentuckySportsRadio.com. We got a ton of stuff out there, and if you're a member over there at Gators Online, you can check out all of our stuff. We don't talk too much trash about Florida over there. So y'all have a good one. Appreciate y'all having me on.